So in yesterday's video, I talked about how I felt it was weird that in a game that I was playing, there was a lot of very, let's call it oddly drawn characters, right? And obviously, if you want to see that, I'll link it below. But it got me thinking today while I was, looking through the comments and that, and really thinking about it. What what exactly is the point of fan service, right? Because obviously, I mean, in the name, you'd assume it's to service fans of a certain work, right? And in a more broad sense, it's more of a like, they're trying to make the characters look all hot and sexy so that people watch the show, right? Like that's assumedly the point. But I don't think I've ever seen a show where the addition of it has really made me enjoy the work more, right? Like I think there's never a scene where like somebody trips down and accidentally does something perverted where I'm like, you know what, man, we're better off because of that, right? I mean, so I'm very confused on who the audience is supposed to be, right? Because I think for anybody that's like creepy, right? Like any of the general creeps that you would think of as like the main people that'd be watching this kind of thing, um, it feels almost like I don't know, it feels like wouldn't they just go and, you know, just like watch porn or something? Like isn't that like naturally what you'd assume they would do? Um, because like whenever I'm watching a show like this, especially if it's a show that has a lot of promise, right? For example, something like Fire Force, I think has a lot of it has even though it has all these good things going for it, and the opening's really fun, and the animation's really sick, and the concept's really cool, all this stuff gets ruined by the fact that it's like, oh, and all right, I can't watch this anywhere around my family. Like, cool, that's really, really cool, right? Because I think the best shows have none of it, right? I think when you think of shows um that are like, the greatest that you can think of, right? Your like Full Metal Alchemists, your Attack on Titans, right? Like those things that people generally put at that upper tier, they never have these kind of scenes, and they're still able to retain a lot of popularity just on the merits of their writing. And I can understand, like, obviously, maybe you're just not that good of a writer, but like, wouldn't it make sense? Wouldn't it be a lot easier and a lot more, I guess, I don't know, just a lot nicer to just make the characters look hot and then just have them in every scene just looking hot? Like, I don't see what the point is of making this everything have to go out of their way to have these scenes that feel also they just kind of feel creepy as like an audience member. It just because I'm like, and though this is more in like the sense of anime and stuff, which obviously it's weird that a lot of these characters are high schoolers and there's still these very creepy scenes. Like that's another discussion for another time. But even in Western media, like when you look at something like the Transformers movies or like these big budget blockbusters, there always seems like there's like a character that's simply just meant to be like ogled at, and I think it's very odd because it's like who is this for, right? Because if you ever watched a movie or seen a show and you're like this is better now, like I'm enjoying this more, right? Because the only show that I think has had more, I guess, sexual designs and um like more lewd looking like characters that I think actually pulls it off in a much more respectful and I guess classy manner is like something like Cyberpunk Edgerunners, where there's a reason for them to dress like that that is tied with the point of the story. Like the point of that story is that, you know, a lot of these ideals and notions of like being social, being like kind and respectful of everybody in society has kind of divulged at this point because at this point the gap of rich and poor has made it so that people kind of don't care about concepts like gender and race and all of these things because of that class struggle. And so you can see why these characters kind of just dress however, right? Because it's more about the expression than it is about than the actual like lewdness of it all. Right? And so you can see how there's like an argument to be made that this is much more part of the theming and part of the ideals that the show is trying to push onto its audience rather than just kind of being there for the sake of it. But when but I think that's one of the only examples where I can generally think of like, no, this added something, right? And I don't, it just because it takes shows that I think would would be really cool. Like it feels like it's almost, I guess it's like a cop out for bad writers, or like not even bad writers necessarily, but just writers that don't think that they're good enough to entertain you. Like don't think that they're doing a good enough job at their actual job, which is to write an entertaining story, that they just have to like throw something at you as to be like, ah, I'm still paying attention now, right? And I really wish that writers just have more confidence in their actual product rather than trying to rely on this like kind of I, I guess icky feeling, right? Because a show that I personally love that I can't recommend to people because of this exact problem is something like Code Geass, which because of it being I guess the product of its time, despite the fact that it's an incredible political thriller at its core, every now and then they just have a very weird scene where it's like, why is this here? Like, why does this need to be here? Right? Like, what's the end game? Right? And that that does it definitely annoys me because it makes rewatching the shows, especially and trying to remember what you loved about them so much, it makes it so much harder because it's like I feel like I having to recognize just how creepy this feels as an audience member, right? Um, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be that like because obviously, I mean, if the character gets popular, naturally there's going to be a level of people sexualizing the character, and that's a natural thing that's just going to happen, right? But I think that especially when shows feel like the only reason why some of the characters are there is just cause, right? And I think it makes it very it makes it much harder to because I think it also just gives a bad stigma around these kind of pieces of media because it makes it feel like oh the reason you're watching this is because you're some kind of a perv and it's like no there's a story being told, right? I mean also side note to actually focus on the drawing for a second, my entire search history was just looking at a bunch of different like cat girls and stuff just because I needed reference models on how their hands do that, right? That's another thing like who is like is this like a does this seem fun, right? I don't know if you've ever met a cat. They're very rude. They're not very fun to be around. So I don't know like this idea that like because I think it's almost as if they've taken the aesthetic of being a cat and then grafted a bunch of like dog-esque features on it, which is a very odd concept that I'm now coming to realize like in a lot of these shows, right? Because obviously there will be a character that's like, you know, some weird like furry bait garbage, but then they still like love people unconditionally, which is like I don't cats don't do that. Like they don't, right? And so it's just very odd, right? Uh, Also, I could not I don't know, I can't like wrap my head around like a legitimate argument as to like a show that's been improved by fan service, right? Because in shows that want to deal with bigger themes of, you know, sex, sexual liberation, you know, self-expression through the means of sex, like these very big boy concepts, I feel like fan service just almost doesn't come into play as much, right? Because even like in something like Kill la Kill, which has obviously a lot of very sexualized characters, it feels like there's still like at least a level of respect towards them, right? Because it feels like the story is wants to use it as a vessel to talk about other things rather than just kind of doing it because look at it, right? And I don't know, I think that just that small amount of respect that the creator can give to these kind of shows um is I don't know, I think it helps to boost its especially its longevity, right? Like because I think that's why a lot of shows get remembered, right? It's because they can transcend what like what people think of when they think of an anime, right? Because something like Fullmetal Alchemist, if you ask anybody what to start off with, that's going to be the show because it's just so good that it's like you know like what's you know what's even the problem like is there even a like there's not problematic scenes in that show, and so it makes it a lot easier for it to transcend its own medium if it is truly a story worth listening to, right? And it makes it very easy to recommend to people because of that same thing, and so allows it to get this giant audience, and I think it only can happen if the authors can trust themselves that they're good enough at writing, and I think a lot of authors aren't, and I think it's very annoying, right? Because there's always every like every now and then I'll see some show That's just another like garbage piece of bait for all of this. And I'm like, who's watching this, right? Because I'll go, maybe watch an episode of something. I'm like, how do people sit through? How are people like foaming at the mouth for another season of this? Right? Because at the end of the day, it's like if it's just sex appeal, just go watch porn, dude. Like, is that not easier? Is that not easier than like all of? I guess it's just being teased for like almost having do you just want like a little more story with your pornography? Because that's what it feels like. It's so like what's the end goal here, right? And it's just I don't know. It's very sad that especially a lot of older shows have this problem of um being very hard to watch, knowing that it's not necessary. And that's why I really like things like JJK and a lot of newer shows to an extent, because I think it's finally kind of being weeded out. Because for bigger audiences, I think you can have characters that just are characters, right? And so it's very nice to be able to just watch that show and not have to worry about some creepy scene, right? Because the only creepy things that JJK does, like if you want to call it fan service, I mean, in that same kind of realm, is like obviously they draw all the dudes hot, but I think it almost, I don't know, as a guy, it feels more like, I guess, I guess it just because like all the scenes of the guys that like are meant to, I guess, be more fan servicey are just scenes of them being cool. So like it works for both spectrum of people, right? People that just want to watch a cool show and people that don't, right? So I don't know. That's more thoughts on just JJK and specifically, so I'll save that for another video. But this yeah, no, this was just on my mind after making that last video. So if yeah, if you want to hear anything else about what I have to say, I'd recommend subscribing. Thank you for all of the people that were part of the last video. It was very nice to see comments and all that. And yeah, I should have another video in the next few days, so stay tuned. Bye.